Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, everybody. It gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome everybody here tonight for the 21st Annual Frank Sargeson Memorial Lecture and the 6th Annual Frank Sargeson Prize Award Ceremony. I'm Sarah Sheaf, and I'm the convener of the English program here at Waikato. And I'd like to extend a few special welcomes to our co-hosts, the Friends of Hamilton Libraries, who are here tonight, and to the members of the Sargeson Trust, who I know are here. I can't see you, but I know you're here. Thank you for coming from Auckland for this evening. And I'd also like to extend a special welcome to those of you who are joining us on the live stream tonight, especially the Sargeson Prize entrants from all around the country. Frank Sargeson was one of New Zealand's most influential short story writers. He was born here in Hamilton in 1903, qualified as a solicitor in Auckland, travelled to Europe, worked for a time on his uncle Oakley Sargeson's farm in the King Country, and by his 30s, he'd settled back in Auckland in the old family batch at 14 Esmond Road, Takapuna, where he began to live the life he really wanted to live, fully committed to writing and to helping other people to write. It's particularly fitting that the Sargeson Prize honours his memory and his literary legacy. In his lifetime, he mentored a whole generation of younger writers with advice and food from his garden, and shelter when they needed it, cash when he could, and that dreadful Limora citrus wine. The prize that we offer in his name continues that tradition of support. Frank also left an impressive documentary legacy. His papers are held in the Alexander Turnbull Library in Wellington, where they occupy 878 folders, over 7.3 linear metres of shelf space. This year, the Sargeson Trust supported the Turnbull Library's application to have the Sargeson papers entered in UNESCO's International Memory of the World Register. This register identifies items of documentary heritage which have worldwide significance. It brings the value of that heritage to wider public notice and facilitates preservation, access, and awareness. We learned a couple of weeks ago that our application had been successful. Frank's papers have joined UNESCO-recognised collections in New Zealand as diverse as Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Women's Suffrage Petition, the Minute Books of the Maori Land Court, and Catherine Mansfield's literary papers. And it's particularly gratifying that Janet Frame's papers were added into the UNESCO register this year too, in the centennial of her birth. So there's one other personal thing I'd like to say, which is that all of these events are special, but this one's particularly special for me. Some of you will know that I edited Frank Sargeson's letters for publication a few years ago. And that book saw the light of day because of the vision of Harriet Allen, who at the time was the commissioning editor at Random House. And Harriet now brings her world of experience as a fiction editor to her role as the judge of this year's Sargeson Prize. So thank you, Harriet, from me for your support of all things Sargeson. So I'd like to now quickly explain the structure of tonight's event, and then I'll hand over to Professor Quigley, who will introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Selina Tusitala Marsh. So the first part of the lecture is going to be our annual lecture from Selina, and then I'll pop back up and introduce Catherine, who will host the 2024 Sargeson Prize Award Ceremony, and I'll see you again at the end of the evening. So I hope that you enjoy what we have in store for you. So without further ado, Professor Quigley.
Tēnā koutou e tēnei ahi pō, hurino e te whare, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's lecture and also to the announcement of the Sargeson Prize for this year. It's my great pleasure to be here to support my colleagues in our English program here at the University of Waikato and also support our relationship with the Friends of the Hamilton Public Library. It's great to see so many of you here to help us celebrate this important event. Also, of course, great that we have Frank on the stage to help us with tonight's events. Although best known for his short stories, Frank Sargeson was also a playwright and an acclaimed novelist. More than any other writer, he captured a working class New Zealand vernacular and the society that gave rise to it. He resisted the urge of many writers to explain the behaviours of his characters and left this up to the reader to work out. It was this style that influenced a generation of younger New Zealand writers at the time. So it's our great pleasure to have tonight's presenter, poet and academic, Professor Selina Tusitala Marsh, with us to give the lecture. Selina's work as a performer and author has shaped Pacific literature and culture. Through her poetry and performances, Selina explores themes of identity, culture, and social justice. She's the author of 3 critically acclaimed collections of poetry and an award-winning graphic memoir series. Her work saw her named the Commonwealth Poet for 2016 and the New Zealand Poet Laureate for 2017. Selina is also focused on fostering the next generation of writers and ensuring that Pacific literature continues to thrive and evolve. She's a professor in the English department at the University of Auckland, an advocate for the integration of creative writing in school curricula across Aotearoa, and part of the growing New Leaders program, which aims to equip Pacific leaders with the transformative tools of storytelling and poetry. Selina's dedication to her craft and commitment to empowering others have seen her recognised with the title of Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit and a fellowship in the Royal Society of New Zealand. For tonight's lecture, Professor Marsh will present a lecture entitled I Really Dig Frank, a Pacifica Poet Scholars Led by Line Praxis of Connection. In doing so, Professor Marsh will explore how her Indigenous practice as both a poet and educator fosters connections with the land and the memories of those who have passed. Will you please join me in welcoming to give the Sargeson Lecture for this year, Professor Selina Tusitala Marsh.
Actually saw Professor Quigley in the reception area and he kept on looking at me and I was like, what are you looking at? Like, either come up or don't look. So now I know who you are, so thank you so much for that gorgeous introduction. Ma lo le soifua mawa malalangi e mama. O lo ingoa Selina Tusitala Marsh. Tusitala is the Samoan Tuvaluan word for storyteller. It is my grandfather's name. My grandfather hails from the small village of Niutau in Tuvalu. My grandfather was named after Robert Louis Stevenson, the most famous Tusitala, canonical Scottish author of tales such as Kidnapped in Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For as oral people are wont to do, they record their histories in the names of people, places, and spaces. So there's an entire generation of Tusitala running around in Tuvalu. And it's my absolute honour to stand in his name as I realise the legacy of Tusitala in my life. I would like to thank Sarah Sheaf for her indomitable spirit. She has repeatedly invited me to give this lecture, and I've always been overseas when she's extended the invitation. So graciously, I thank you for your tenacity. It was quite irritating at times, but I'm here. Thank you, Professor Quigley, Waikato University, for inviting me to give this lecture. Thank you to the Friends of Hamilton Library for helping support my visit. Thank you to the Frank Sargeson Trust and its chair, Elizabeth Aitken-Rose. Elizabeth, could you put your arm up? Oh, another person who looked at me weirdly, and I was like, just... Wonderful. Lovely to see you, Elizabeth. And thank you for your support. Thank you for letting me dig around at Frank's batch in Takapuna. Thank you to my partner, Paula Melissa, for never balking at any of my poetry experiments I come up with. When I said, babe, I want to bury Frank Sargeson's story, The Hole That Jack Dug at Frank's Place, and dig it up 5 weeks later, will you help? He just grabbed his shovel, he grabbed his pick, and helped me dig a hole and later disinter a poem. I dedicate this lecture to the late, great Professor Terry Sturm. Terry also co-supervised my PhD on First Pacific Women Poets, and without his help, I have little doubt that I would have finished. Even when ill, Terry invited me to his home. Linda answered the door and led me to his still smoky office, and I emerged with a better structured thesis. Terry lectured me in New Zealand literature, and it was Terry who first introduced me to the work of Frank Sargeson. So I really dig Terry, and I really dig Frank. And sometimes, in my imagination, they morph together. You know what I'm saying, right? Pākehā men, white beards, glasses. In fact, morphing is what I do, creating clashes and seeing what surfaces as part of my poetry-making kite. And here's the poem that surfaced just from using the letters in our storytelling names, Sargeson and Tusitala. Saga's tale, made from the letters in Sargeson and Tusitala. Sages see a star, a sun, rotate, rise, and set. Sails toss on sea's glass as tides surge. A sage's tale starts, states a soul's song. Runes state, sit, rest, listen to nature's tales. And I particularly love the surfacing lines of sails toss on sea's glass as tides surge, given the location of Frank's batch sandwiched between Takapuna Beach and the seaside village of Devonport. And those last lines, runes state, sit, rest, listen to nature's tales. Runes are characters in the ancient alphabet system of peoples like the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, and they're also mysterious symbols used for divination. My burying and digging up of words is a kind of runic divination, with nature adding her decompositional composition to the mix. I dig up letters and words and part words and rearrange them to tell a tale that is part Frank's, part Papa Tuanuku's, and part mine. But where did all this madness come from? As a poet, I also really dig found poetry and blackout poetry. These techniques do not suffer writer's block excuses, as I tell my students often. It takes the language that's already there and by extraction composes something new. Found and blackout poetry has roots stretching all the way back to the 1760s when some guy called Caleb Whitford started reading newspapers sideways for laughs. Fast forward to the 1920s and you've got Tristan Tzara's turning it into a wild performance art in Paris and contributing to the Dadaist movement. Then the 50s and 60s hit and boom, Brian Geisen and William Burroughs are cutting up text like it's going out of style. But wait, there's more. Tom Phillips takes it to a whole new level by painting over entire Victorian novels and calling it the Humument Project, which lasts decades. And just when you think it couldn't get any weirder, Austin Kleon shows up in 2005 and makes it internet famous with his famous newspaper blackouts. The whole thing is like a masterclass in creative theft. The kind T.S. Eliot talked about when he said, "Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal." It's all about taking something old, messing about with it, and making it your own creation. But knowing how, quote, your difference makes a difference, to cite Mophead, aka myself, I put an Indigenous spin on it by merging found and blackout poetry with the earth. I think about earth, land, dirt, not just as material to work with, but a medium to work through ideas about identity, place, and how to create decolonial spaces, how our bloodlines connect or disconnect us to our landlines. I explore this through written, drawn, and spoken lines. I call this my lead-by-line praxis. The first time I began merging found and blackout poetry with landlines and bloodlines was in New York in 2015. I was invited to read at the Asian Pacific American Institute at NYU. It was there I met people with Lenape bloodlines, the original people of Manhattan, now known as Manhattan. I was taken to Inwood Hill, a park at the top of the island, where a rock marks the 1626 exchange of the island for a few trinkets between the Dutch explorer Peter Minuit and a few representatives of a few sub-tribes of the Lenape people. I wanted to do something. I'd be in New York for 3 weeks, so I wrote a letter to the earth, asking what she'd seen in this place, asking what had happened. I asked rock, earth, sky, tree, and grass for the stories of the Lenape. I buried it at the base of the rock and returned 2.5 weeks later to dig it up. That's the rock to my left, my right. Apparently, I didn't dig it deep enough. And apparently, one shouldn't write and eat at the same time, leaving food smells on paper for ravenous New York squirrels to dig up and eat. And when I returned, nothing remained except for chewed up bits of paper. But nothing is still something. Nothing still had something to say about the Lenape people. Centuries of genocide, forced migrations, and the environmental destruction of their homeland, Lenape, their ongoing disappearing in US politics, and their tenacious struggle to be seen and heard and have their bloodlines and landlines recognized. Nothing, it seems, is also everything. Now, excuse me for 1 minute. I've got to get my poetry book out of my bag. So in my third collection of poetry, I wrote a poem called Inward Hill, New York. For Dakota. For 60 guilders, Peter Minuet, for the whole sum of it, bought Manahata in 1626. That's $25 today. The whole of it, the length of it, the breadth of it, the run of it, the line of it, the soil, rock, and sag of it, the trees on it, the birds in it. Peter Minuet could not buy the people of it. Lenape, like the last tulip tree, all 28 years of it disappeared. Lenape haven't, like stories which never quite do. A few months later, I was reading at the 2015 Taipei International Book Exhibition, and I discovered the 228 Memorial Peace Park, a magnificent garden filled with blossoming cherry trees, azaleas, palms, ponds, pavilions, pathways, and shrines. But beneath its beauty lay a history of massacre. On February the 28th, 1947, civilians protesting brutal Chinese government were massacred, resulting in thousands of deaths at the site of the 228 Memorial Peace Park. Since I'd be returning to Taiwan some 3 months later, I decided to write a letter about its history and ask, where does healing come from? Rock, earth, sky, tree, blossom, grass. When I returned 3 months later, followed by a very skeptical Adam Dudding, who was doing an article for the New Zealand Herald and mocked me every step of the way, we dug up the fragments, and this time we did find letters, among them an A, a D, an E, and a J. Or a D, an A, an E, and a J. Or an E, a J, and a D, and an A. Or a J, an A, a D, and an E. Jade, a taonga in Taiwan, its buried treasure. Adam was, for once, speechless. Well, he had a few expletives. He couldn't quite believe it. I wrote a poem that began with that I named Jade as its title, and Adam headlined his piece for the New Zealand Herald, Nutty Professor Digs Up a Poem. In June this year, I expanded this experiment and made it communal. I was working in Maui with the post-fire Lahaina community, wearing my other hat as the co-director for the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation. I ran a writing workshop at a Kanaka Māori-owned farm on the gorgeous Makina coast of Maui. This organic farm had been in this Hawaiian family for 8 generations. Each generation had struggled to keep the land, and in order to pay horrendous land tax driven up by the billion-dollar resorts that popped up all around it, it had to parcel off land and sell them to the same resorts. Last year's land tax bill was $65,000. But after a few generations, you kind of get into the know, and a couple of the young nieces are trained to be lawyers, and they took their case to the court in Hawaii and had a special exemption for generationally owned land. So their bill's now about $8,000, which they can just about cover. It's farmed by 2 women, wives. One is an X-ray technician by day and a farmer after hours. The other is a heavy machine operator, farmer after hours, and they are doing incredibly well. I got participants to write a love letter to Papa Hanaumoko, Earth Mother, beginning with their first memory of earth, dirt, mud. We then buried their letters. That's the burial site. We had the use of their digger. There are about 30 people, including family members. I returned 3 months later with some of the participants to dig it up. We found lots of fragments. Remarkably, the first word unearthed was aina, the Hawaiian word for land. These were the fragments that were unearthed. So I rearranged them and made this found poem. Title, Earth Writing. Aina, toes, in the grass. You take of, you ground. When you don't want to be forgot. You and us do know. Farmer be all for you round. To push. Art, we spire the past, remembering who. When invited to give this memorial lecture, it gave me an excellent reason to, for once, actually stop on Edmund Road in Takapuna and see where Sargeson actually lived and wrote. And it made complete sense to me to bury Frank's short story, The Hole That Jack Dug. I asked Elizabeth, chair of the Sargeson Trust, if that would be okay. She said, of course, but just to mind the loquat tree where Frank's ashes are buried, along with the ashes of Chris Cathcart and Chris Cole Catley. Pala and I gave it a wide berth when looking for the right spot to dig our hole. Except when we returned 5 weeks later, I'd quite forgotten about Frank and Chris, as the loquats had ripened and were looking plump and delicious, and Pala had never tasted one before, so Frank's loquats. How low you squat in the dull glow of a mid-afternoon, sun in Takapuna, on Esmond Road, hedged in and abetted by avocado roots, its pendulous fruits, and a dying something tree, leaning in to witness, Pala marking a square of making before raising the pick to pock the good dirt, then dig a hole for Frank. Loquat, you delight our earth-ridden fingers with your plump flesh as we press your small suns into our mouths, Pala's first taste of you. So we found a spot and buried Frank's short story, The Hole That Jack Dug, first published in 1964. Now here's the lowdown for those of you new to the story. And thank you so much, Professor, for giving us a context to Frank's aesthetics, because I've written it in honour of the spirit of his storytelling. Picture this. We've got Jack, your typical Kiwi bloke, built like a brick outhouse from years of working in the quarry. One day, out of the blue, he starts digging this massive hole in his backyard. His mate, that's our narrator, rocks up and finds Jack sweating buckets, working away in nothing but his boots and small shorts. Now, Jack's not much of a talker, and his mate knows better than to pester him with questions, so they just get on with it, digging together, having a yarn. Meanwhile, Jack's missus is losing the plot. She can't figure out why on earth her husband's turned their backyard into a construction site. Her fancy friends are all aflutter too, sipping tea and gossiping about Jack's sanity. But here's the kicker. Jack never explains why he's digging. Not to his mate, not to his wife, not to anyone. He just keeps at it day after day, night after night. There's war talk in the background, planes flying overhead, but Jack reckons his hole is more important than all that. Makes you wonder, eh? In the end, Jack fills the hole back in. Just like that. No explanation, no fuss. Leaves everyone scratching their heads. And that's it. That's the story. Simple as on the surface. But like Jack's hole, there's a lot more going on underneath. You see, it's all about what's not said. The spaces between the words. Classic Sargeson. Makes you want to grab a spade and start digging yourself just to see what you might find. So what do we find in this story? Well, first off, we've got masculinity front and centre. Jack's all muscle and sweat, digging away like a man possessed. It's a very physical, very male way of expressing, well, whatever it is he's expressing. Sargeson gives us a rightful eye of Kiwi bloke culture here and its unspoken undertones. Because there's this whole mateship thing. Jack and the narrator, they've got this unspoken understanding. No need for heart-to-hearts or deep and meaningfuls. Just two cobbers digging a hole together. It's beautiful, really, in a very stoic, very New Zealand kind of way. But here's where it gets juicy. All that silence, all that's left unsaid. The story's practically bursting with tension, but it's all bubbling beneath the surface. Jack's not talking, his mate's not asking. and we're left to fill in the blanks. It's like another masterclass in Kiwi emotional repression. And don't forget that war lurking in the background like a taniwha in the mist. Jack's digging while planes fly overhead. It's a not-so-subtle nod to the anxiety of post-war New Zealand. Maybe Jack's hole is his way of dealing with all that unspoken trauma, or maybe it's his way of avoiding it. And we can't overlook the class divide. Jack's missus and her mates, all prim and proper with their books and tea, they're from a different world. They can't fathom why a man would just dig a hole. It's Sargeson poking at the cultural divide, the intellectual versus the physical. And lastly, there's this big question mark hanging over the whole story. Why? Why is Jack digging? Why does he fill it in? Sargeson's not giving us any easy answers. He's making us do the work, making us dig deep into our own minds to find meaning. In the end, the hole that Jack dug is about the holes in our lives, the gaps in our communication, the spaces between what we say and what we mean. It's about how we express ourselves when words fail us, and how sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we can't put into words. It's deceptively simple, but like Papa Tuanuku herself, it's got layers upon layers of meaning if you're willing to get your hands dirty and dig. And I was, and so was Pala. And like Jack's mysterious hole, my poetic excavations are about unearthing hidden meanings and creating new connections. When I buried Sargeson's story on his own land, I was, in a sense, returning his words to the earth that inspired them. Just as Jack's digging revealed things about himself and his relationships, my act of burying and unearthing Sargeson's words reveals new layers of meaning in my own work, in my poetry of decomposition. In Sargeson's story, Jack's physical labour becomes a form of expression. For me, the decomposition of the buried text is also a form of expression. It's the earth's way of editing the text, highlighting some parts and obscuring others. Just as the whole in Sargeson's story becomes a focal point for the characters' interactions and revelations, the decomposed text becomes a new entity, speaking not just with Frank's voice or mine, but with the voice of the land itself. By engaging with Sargeson's work through my burial and excavation practice, I'm not just interpreting his story, I'm extending it, allowing it to grow and change in ways that resonate with our contemporary understanding of identity, expression, and our relationship with the land. In the end, like Jack and his mate, we're all just digging holes of one sort or another, whether it's in our backyards or in the realm of literature. We're all searching for meaning, connection, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. What we dug up 5 weeks later was riveting. And when I say we, I actually mean Pala, but I love this so much. When I saw those worms through his text, that was like, oh my gosh. Because in 1969, Terry Stern reviewed Frank Sargeson's novel, Joy of the Worm. So it was a really cool connection back to Terry. So we had a lot of fragments like this. And using only the dug words that were dug up, and inspired by one of my favourite poets, E. Cummings, I made this poem. Digging for words. Jack dug moment to moment, carefully for years, shining. Trouble inside, Jack said. Can't worry, make it great. Shine as stars considerable, somehow always stay. Jack reckoned, been worrying, but one can ever. Eyes sky blue staring, whole about eating man. From the bottom back level, Jack and the whole again. Work friends seem blow to bits, mistake asylum in the no hole. Jack filling it in again. That's can, Jack say. Any 2 showers yet, no fuss, no sign of a way. Inside again dusting and be persuaded, ache a day. It's so cool, right? Okay, so then I finished off with this poem. This is a dug up found poem arranged in the order of disinterment. So Pala would dig, I'd grab, I'd write down the word. So this is a true found poem, no choreography on my behalf. And I'm reading it again after E. Cummings. Be persuaded, so that was the very first words dug up. Second, be persuaded, a day, any 2 showers he might, home his inside, again dusting. No sign of some drunk other way. Now while I was, just had do and big range window, but how? Except with things, ends to go, work and all. The whole had got a pretty before, new scorching, the whole with nothing. On pair of shorts, Jack is a big, powerfully developed and seen, and just that rig, out ever believe, afternoon, swearing hell, was as the I rid question, the whole, pretty new, Sargeson, end of my time I went, got a bit, head and good folks say how, Jack and the hope filling in again. He that use it, there were kids about, and his thing about, stuff up from the bottom of back in with a joke. To be a no. A stocky, powerful sun, throwed out of a season, noon when I was sitting, been to crowd and gnaws, sticky, and I had my would be sometime yet before. Front well, a breeze off the harbour, at the sand, which veranda, floor, but the my eyes, and I are out, that cut, disappeared. Was Jack in a hurry? The work was, friends, he seemed blow to bits, for Jack mistake the lunatic, the whole owing. We'd after the telling. You want him? But the moments was the moment. Halved and on cake as a cry. Jack said can, make, wash. That's I am to me. It scares, crazy, scorching, craze. How the first one after, what lovely days. Somehow, always. Inside hole, about, after, and so. Considerable holes. Anything about I. Jack was ugly, bloke, quarry, a darker colour, a white man, and he had a sign, shows too many, shorts, powerfully for years you'd, hell, the trouble with teeth, it's easy when there was men there, her, shut it out, ways, the great, make it plain. That's can together, ooh, iwa, miss the couldn't, marry the brain, on kid about, just fully try it, one thing he him. 10 books buying, Jack for reckon, was because tell she weighs a one, but I was had, I say, after the pair of us, read more one as a worry, get the rot, stayed, be looking, spouted, hot, house is been work, she said, Jack on, house and bout wood on, looking account of pieces, hot of be, somehow there as all, a do, a line, and she said, are you digging? If to do our, spoil work, Jack once, she, we, friends there, me, you, Jack, all. What going, good how folks be, win. Thank you. So what's it all for, miss, as one of my intermediate kids would say? Well, I found that in the composition, co-composition between Frank, myself, and Papa Tuanuku, there were 7 takeouts for creativity, 7 takeouts for life that I want to leave you with. The first one is creativity often emerges from chaos and disorder. No sign of some drunk other way. I love that, because I'm sure Sam Hunt was drunk when he visited my intermediate school. I don't know why writers do that. Takeout number 2. Creativity and meaning often require digging beneath the surface. The bottom of back in. The bottom of back in. And oftentimes my creative writing students will bring me their writing and not actually see what they've written. And I'll just get them to sit with it until we can see it. See it. And I read recently how when Maria Rainier Rilke, who was an apprentice to Degas and was going through a writer's block and kind of moaning about it to Degas, I read about the response that Degas had given him, which was, you've forgotten how to see, so go to the zoo and see, and come back when you've seen. And day after day, Rilke would go to the zoo, and finally he saw. And 75 poems later on the panda bear, he could really see. So the bottom of back in. So for me, it's not sending my students off saying, go away and write it again. It's go away, sit with it, and see what you've got. Third takeout, stream of consciousness thinking can lead to profound insights in art and life. Quote, I rid, question the whole, pretty new. Don't you just love that? I just got so excited. I was like, I rid. So see something and then don't see it. Drop your seeing of it. Pick up another kind of seeing. Always with a curious mind. Question. And something pretty new will surface. Fourth takeout. The process of creation and living is often messy, unpredictable, and resistant to strict order. Quote, blow to bits, for Jack, mistake the lunatic. And sometimes when I'm in the drafting process and I get stuck, I literally have to throw it out and see where things land anew. Because through that principle of contiguity, when you put two unlike things together and you kind of see the magic that happens in those unlikely connections, that's that process. Blow to bits. Do the thing that people think, that's crazy. Dig a poem. Bury a poem at Frank's. That's crazy. Fifth takeout. The search for creativity and meaning involves both external exploration and internal reflection. Quote, front well, a breeze off the harbour, at the sand, which veranda floor, but the my eyes and I. My eyes and I. Sixth takeout. Perspective is crucial. How we view things shapes our creative output and life experiences. Quote, big range window, but how accept with things? How accept with things? So I'm always harping onto my students, concrete language over abstract. Concrete. How, except with things, can we create a portal into story that is uniquely yours? Because only you have those things around you in your world. Big range window, not just your little narrow porthole. Big range window. How do I get a big range window, miss? Read. Read someone else. Even better, read who you don't like. And the last takeout, life and creativity both involve cycles of building up and breaking down, filling and emptying. Quote, filling in again and shut it out. Filling in again and shut it out. So I excavated another 15 of these, but these were the main ones. And that's me. Thank you, Frank, for giving back. Don't quite know what we're going to do with the hole in the back, Elizabeth, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of grown over. Yeah? It's flourishing. Excellent, excellent. And I hope I haven't offended, or Pala and I haven't offended the dead by ingesting those loquats. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing this time with me. Please go away and read some Frank Sargeson. He's just brilliant, and his short stories are my favourite. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Selina. Big range window. Little tiny portal you made for us and took us on that amazing story, and how wonderful to think that that tiny piece of land at Esmond Road is still producing such riches. I think you would have loved it. Thank you. So thank you again, Selina, and I'd now like to hand over to Catherine for the rest of this evening's proceedings.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to the 6th Annual Sargeson Prize. Selina, it's been fascinating to hear about your writing process. I know I've written pieces that I want to bury in a hole in the ground. I'm just not sure I want to dig them up again. We're hardwired to want to tell and be told stories. They can entertain, reveal, persuade, hide, connect, heal. The entries we received this year accomplished all of those things and more. And once again, it's been a delight to gauge the range of topics from urgent to frivolous, surreal to achingly current, that are engrossing the writers of Aotearoa. I'd like to acknowledge the passing in April of Sir Vincent O'Sullivan, the Chief Judge of last year's Sargeson Prize, and one of our finest writers, although one of our most modest. He insisted we didn't need to use his title. It was such a pleasure to work with him on the 2023 prize, and he and his beautifully crafted, gossipy emails are very much missed. Some thank yous, first to this year's judge, the legendary editor Harriet Allen, for selecting our winners from an impressive field. Thank you to the University of Waikato, who have sponsored the prize for 6 years now. I'm especially grateful to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Neil Quigley, and our former Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Patrick Lehman, for their support of what has become one of our most prestigious literary awards. The Open Division winner receives $10,000, while the Secondary Schools Division winner receives $2,000 and a week-long writing residency. This summer, they will come and live in the halls of residence here at Te Whare Wānanga o Waikato, with all meals provided, an office in the School of Arts, and a writing mentor from our flourishing Writing Studies program. Thank you to Steve Braunius and Newsroom's Reading Room for publishing the winning stories. Thank you to my colleagues here at the university and to my assistants, Connie Buchanan and Abigail Marshall, for their help in narrowing down the glorious 1,306 entries, a record number. But thank you most of all to everyone who entered the competition. As I say every year, there would be no Sargeson Prize without you, and please send us some more of your words next year. We're fortunate to have some of our writers here tonight, and shortly they'll give us a taste of their stories, but I'll hand over to Harriet now, who will announce the winners, and to our Acting Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Ahorangi Professor Bridget Masters-Awateri, who will award the certificates.
Thank you to the University of Waikato for their continued support and harbouring of the Sargeson Prize. To Catherine Chidgey and the other people involved in the massive organisation in the background, and to the writers who submitted their works, all 1,306 of them. The Olympics were still on when I was judging the long list, and I toyed with the idea of saying such things as winning involved stamina, jumping higher, staying on the beam, sticking to the rhythm and nailing your landing. And there is something in such an analogy, but ultimately choosing a winner is a subjective undertaking. The finishing tape that a writer breaks through is not a clear-cut line on the field of a stadium, but an internal one, where words on a page have transformed into scenes in your mind that you're walking through, touching, smelling, seeing. A successful story makes you engage with an event and characters as if they were real, and it makes the reader feel and think, and then pause, realizing they've been taken somewhere that has impacted them in a stimulating and unique way. If a story has failed to do that, the fault might be in the writing, but it might be in the reading. A writer, therefore, should never feel discouraged if they have not made it to the top handful. I'm sure there are many promising works that didn't even make it to the long list, and they may well flourish if given a bit more time and further refinement. The positive impact of this competition is that it has prompted so many people to put fingers to keyboard or to hunt for that file that's been lurking neglected in a dark corner of their hard drive. The following stories, though, left their mark on those who selected the long list and then, in turn, on me. Reading the secondary schools division assures me that the future of writing is in very good hands. I found it hard to believe that this long list could have been written by 16 to 18-year-olds. The pieces were perceptive, lively, and so well written. The 6 highly commended entries are Conversations in My Mother's Garden by Micah Bradburn of Otago Girls High School, The Rosebush by Karizime Alfante of St. Dominic's Catholic College, Henderson, The House That Jack Built by Armea Columbik of Kapiti College, The Crescent Ace Constellation by Mina Belgari of Tower College, I Sang When I Was 12 by Sue Park of Glenfield College. Sue was highly commended in the 2023 competition. And A Matchstick by Madeline Walker of Waikato Diocesan School for Girls. Karazini will come up first, and then Madeline also to join us tonight to receive their certificates. In third place for the secondary schools division is an exquisitely written story about being a young teenager facing the end of childhood, learning about the realities of friendship. We are taken to a batch on a beach and can feel the sand under our toes, the smell of manuka flowers in the breeze. It is that good. This wasn't the only story about disillusionment, but the writing is so evocative while also having such a lightness of touch. It is like that manuka smelling breeze. Not that it's a gentle story, it has the hurt of lemon juice on a cut when the metaphorical Saturn slips out of orbit. The story is Saturn's Orbit by Juliet Blythe of Waimea College, Tasman. Juliet joins us online to read from her piece.
Elliot and I meet up every day, usually at my place, but occasionally at our tree. We swam in the sea until our fingers wrinkled and our hair ties were crusted into our hair by all the salt. We trekked higher into the bush for a better view of the bay, then ran back down, dodging snarled roots and stones until we collapsed in a giggling heap, out of breath. Elliot brought me back to her family's batch and we danced to her dad's ancient Crowded House CDs in the living room, the sunning floorboards creaking as we spun. I felt alive and happy and impossibly grown up, or like a real version of the perfect British children going on adventures who appeared in so many stories. The approaching end of our holiday didn't concern me. Those days seemed to last forever.
Second place goes to work that also has an astonishingly confident style. It's a hoot of a story, which veers towards the caricature, but only enough to make us laugh at what is a very dark tale. What keeps it from being two-dimensional are the spot-on details, such as Mrs. Hudridge's outrage that someone in the office has taken her favourite coffee mug. That actually happened in our office once. Or the thrill she gets each day from seeing her manager's plaque on her desk. The imagery is fresh, vivid, and exactly right for the character. The rain, for instance, splatting on the pavement like overripe plums, and then later soaking up her stockings like butter in a crumpet. Here's a writer in command of every aspect of their story, which rockets along to a scary but also poignant ending. In second place is The Contributor by Tessa Marshall of Avonside Girls High School, Otutahi, Christchurch. We'll now hear Tessa read from her story.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Tessa Marshall, and today I'd like to read an extract from my short story, The Contributor. It's raining when Mrs. Hudridge leaves her house. Fat drops plummet from the sky and splat onto the pavement like overripe plums. How inconvenient. She's already running a tad late. Mrs. Hudridge hefts her handbag above her head and hurries to her trusty 2009 Ford Fiesta, fumbling with the cold keys. Windscreen wipers smear frantically across the glass as she veers onto the A23. The drive to work is, as usual, teeming with young idiot drivers who never indicate properly. She sighs and jabs at the horn a few times for good measure. Thank you.
I must add, humour is very difficult to get right. She does. The top position, however, in the secondary schools division is a story about grief, as indeed were nearly half of the entries in the long list. But this one is also a celebration of a life and a person. What made this story stand out for me, though, is that it is told through the single colour red. This is not an easy thing to do, and yet the result is neither monotone nor monochrome. I've said in the past that short stories need to be like the TARDIS, small on the outside, but opening to a whole world inside. This is a TARDIS. It's just 2 pages long, and yet we come away feeling as though we know the grandmother, we know the narrator, we know their relationship, and we know about the death. We're also given insight into growing up in a country that has a different language and culture from one's family, and how traditions pass through the generations, and yet can be hard to retain when away from their source. Furthermore, we come to understand how those traditions and how those key people in our lives centre us. It's a seemingly simple story, but it is rich and moving. First place goes to Burgundy Bindi by Reshma Tala of Linfield College, Tamaki Makaurau. Reshma is here to read from her winning story.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the University of Waikato for this opportunity. It's honestly an honor to be here today. And here's the extract from my story. Third try. With a shaky hand, I placed the burgundy bindi on my forehead. Is it scented? You'd always put the bindi on for me. I couldn't do it. Then you'd braid my hair, finishing it with a delicate red ribbon. You'd help me with everything. I remember your crimson red sari flowing behind you in the wind, your burgundy bindi a perfect circle on your forehead. I remember your red masala mix, making every dish a delicacy. I'd run to the kitchen whenever I smelt your cooking, saying that I could help. But you'd just laugh and give me a spoonful of scarlet sambar, knowing that's what I really came for. Amber red was the color of the sunset when you took me to Golconda Fort. You told me stories about how once upon a time, a princess was living in those walls. The day I got lost in the crowded market, I was surrounded by stalls of chili and tomatoes. Scarlet flames of fear rose, but as tears began to well, I caught sight of a crimson sari rounding the corner. It was yours. Eyes red with regret, you held my arm until we got home, blaming yourself for losing sight of me. Thank you.
The open division was also tough to judge because, again, there were so many strong entries. The 6 highly commended stories are Playing Hooky by Jake Arthur of Te Whanganui Atara. Jake won second prize in the 2023 competition. The Clappers by Rebecca Blackhurst of Bulla. Weird Fishes by Sarah Booker of Te Whanganui Tara, Wellington. At the Buyer's Risk by Gina Butson of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Second Unit by Timothy Jones of Dunblane, Scotland. And Pink Elephant by Deborah Wilton of North Vancouver, Canada. Gina joins us to receive her certificate. On one level, the winner of the third place is a simple love story, or at least that's what it seems, as its quiet style, beautifully evoked settings, and gentle tone lull the reader. I hadn't realised how much I was cheering these two men along in their warm and caring relationship until one of them wants out, and I found myself internally yelling, "No, don't say that!" It's a powerful piece of writing that can pull you in and pull you under so unobtrusively. It's a story about different ways of seeing, and the readers is just as part of the story as the characters. In third place is Michael by Cello Forrester of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. And Cello, I believe, is here to join us to read their story.
Thank you very much. Later, Grace gave us a ride home. She still seemed tipsy to me, but she told us she'd sobered up, and I didn't feel like making a thing of it. It was quiet in the back seat. Michael was leaning his head against the window, a small circle of condensation forming on the glass. I'd watched the sleepy suburbs of Wanganui sliding by outside, a dark blur of yellow streetlights, and then saw there, in the window, the reflection of my own two shining eyes. They looked sad and somehow hollowed. I glanced over at Grace. She was staring straight ahead. I looked down at the denim jacket I had on. I wondered what the difference was then between loving someone and wanting to be made in their image. I realized I was drunk, and I realized too, pettily, that I had wanted Michael and me to walk home, that I had thought it might be more romantic somehow, with the empty streets and the warm summer air, and our love for each other, the trees so full and bursting with life. Thank you very much.
Coming second is a very different story about a writer deciding to set up in the space under his roof, reliant on his wife to come home from work to restore the ladder so he can get down. Up there, he can't access Wi-Fi or any other distraction from the novel he's been failing to write. It's lively and funny as well as fiendishly clever. The writer in the story puzzles away at the options for his character's marriage, while downstairs his wife arrives home and drinks champagne with an unknown man. The real story is going on under the writer's nose, but he can't get down to find it, even if he was suspicious enough to check it out. And while his novel advances very little and his biggest progress for the day is a list of things to Google, in the process, a short story has been written, because, of course, there are two stories and two writers. It's a fresh and inspired short story about writing, about finding a plot, and about the impediments to creation. In second place is Robinson in the Roof Space by Craig Cliff of Otipoti, Dunedin, and we'll now hear Craig read from his entry.
E nā koutou, ka mihi nui ki a koutou, e mihi ana ki nā tohu o nehe, o Otipoti e nohu nei au, ko tēnei taku mihi ki nā tangata whenua o te rohi nei, ko Craig Cliff toko ingoa, Koinei te timatanga o taku kōrero a Robinson in the roof space. Robinson is making progress, real progress. 2 weeks with this new approach and he's ridden more than the past year combined. It's drastic for sure, leaving his phone beside the fruit bowl, climbing into the roof space above his garage, kicking the ladder away and only letting Janet resurrect it and permit his exit after at least 6 hours have elapsed. To call it an attic would be misleading. There's only room enough for him to sit on a desk chair, lowered as far as it will go, and slide a tray designed for TV dinners over his legs and bash away at his sturdy, sluggish pre-Wi-Fi laptop. It's not an attic, no sir, but a joke keeps looping in his head. I cleaned the attic with my wife last night. I still can't get the dust out of her hair. Janet has never been up here. She played no part in creating the writing nook or concocting the rules of engagement. After some negotiation, she did agree to return the ladder to the edge of the scuttle hole at an appropriate time. Some of us have to work, she'd said. We both work, he'd replied. You sell houses, I will sell books. Kia ora. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your evening.
The first place getter is different yet again. It is a quintessential New Zealand story. It couldn't be about anywhere else. The narrative is a New Zealand voice, but without being cliched, for it's the way of thinking that's so identifiably Kiwi more than the language or dialogue. Beginning with hunting, it conjures up the West Coast with tactile vividness. I felt I was there, tramping through the bush or standing on the sea-sprayed cliffs. Its story catches us in its fast-paced current, involving us, carrying us along to a powerful conclusion. And at that point, you realise it's a strongly political story. Yet unlike many attempts at political fiction, it hasn't hit you over the head with lecturing. It hasn't guilted the reader with emotional blackmail. It isn't didactic nor shoehorns in an agenda. You can tell I've read an awful lot of manuscripts over the years. Rather, the politics arise seemingly organically, though in reality quite brilliantly from the story itself. And what's more, we can see and even empathise with the differing views. We come away understanding how easily we can try to justify our actions, how easily we can be overtaken by the thrill of the chase and potential gain, and how easily we can compromise and confuse our values. I won't give away anything about what happens, but it's squatted firmly in my mind as a story that speaks with power and urgency to where we in this country are now. The winner of the 2024 Sargeson Prize is Greywacky by Ben Jeffries of Te Whanganui, Atara, Wellington. Please welcome Ben to read his winning entry.
Thank you for everyone involved tonight. Such a huge honour. And thank you for the lecture. It was such a beautiful lecture, really. It was amazing. This is just the opening section of Greywacky. There is a certain way of butchering a deer so that it can become a backpack. It's easier than it sounds. You slice a hole through the front leg ligaments and push the back legs through. Cut the head off and gut the thing, and you can quite happily carry the animal for miles. I didn't have a license to harvest wild meat. Culling was all they paid me for. I normally left the carcasses where they fell, but Hana was craving red meat. The doctor said it was normal. She needed iron. I don't know why I thought of that. My memories have a habit of grouping together in ways that don't always make sense. For example, the smell of fennel reminds me of a grandparent who died before I was born. The word taihoa makes me think of the way my fingers move when tying a line to a hook, a certain shade of dusk, and I hear the distant bark of my first sheepdog. The doctor smeared jelly over Hana's stomach and pushed it around with the end of an ultrasound machine. The monitor showed a flipbook scene of shadow and light. You know, in some cultures, they eat the earth to get at the iron. Hana liked that detail. I saw her smile at it and imagine the taste of soil. She wanted our baby to be anchored here, to be of this place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for that. A wonderful taster. I want to read the story now. Warmest congratulations to you and to all of our winners and to all of our entrants for having the courage and faith in your own work to send it. As Catherine said, keep sending it. Thank you to Selina for a fantastic Sargeson Memorial Lecture, and to Harriet for the effort of reading and for your composure and for your wisdom. And thank you to Professor Bridget Masters-Awateri for doing the honours for us, and to Professor Quigley for your ongoing support for our event. And thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you next year for the 22nd Annual Frank Sargeson Memorial Lecture and the 7th Annual Prize Competition. So have a great evening. Mā te wā. See you next year.